I came home on a calm Saturday morning, the kind where the harbor is quiet and the air feels almost too still. But the moment I turned the corner, my heart sank. My boathouse, my pride, my sanctuary, was nothing but a splintered wreck. Wooden beams floated aimlessly in the water shingles, scattered across the dock like confetti from a cruel celebration. And standing there, arms crossed with a smug little smirk, was Karen, the HOA president. She didn't flinch when I confronted her. Instead, she tilted her sunglasses and said, "It was an eyesore. Against the rules. You should thank me for cleaning it up." But here's the thing about people like Karen: they think they own the world because they can bully their neighbors. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have guessed in her wildest HOA fantasy, was that I'm not just some quiet homeowner, I'm the federal harbor inspector. And by tearing down my boathouse, Karen hadn't just broken an HOA guideline, she had violated federal law. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. My name is Jack Thompson. I'm 52 years old, and if you asked anyone around here to describe me, they'd probably say I'm the kind of guy who minds his own business. I live in a coastal HOA community where the salt breeze rolls in each morning, gulls circle overhead, and neighbors wave politely as they trim their hedges. I like it that way, quiet, predictable, the kind of place you think will stay peaceful forever. Before this whole fiasco with Karen, my life was simple, almost idyllic. I've spent the last 3 decades working in maritime regulation. Once upon a time, I was in the Navy. These days, I serve as a federal harbor inspector. It's not a flashy title, but it's important. I make sure docks and boathouses are up to code, safe and compliant with federal law. People might not realize it, but waterways are lifelines. They connect communities, support businesses, and if managed poorly, they can destroy ecosystems. My work is quiet, methodical, and usually invisible. When I clock out, I'm just a husband who loves fishing at dawn, a neighbor who shares a beer on the porch, and a man who takes pride in the little corner of this world I call mine. My wife Linda is the steady force in my life. We've been married 25 years, and she has the kind of patience only a saint or a Navy wife could have. She loves gardening, knows everyone on our street, and has this way of calming me down when my blood starts to boil. But the real jewel of my life, that was my boathouse. I built it with my own 2 hands years ago, piece by piece. Not illegally, not sloppily. No, I followed every permit, every line of code, every federal requirement down to the last nail. To anyone else, it was just a modest structure sitting at the edge of the water. But to me, it was freedom. It was where I kept my old fishing rods, the little motorboat I'd restored, and even the dusty Navy chest filled with mementos I'd never part with. The boathouse wasn't just a building, it was the physical proof that after years of service and work, I had carved out a piece of peace for myself. Now, in communities like ours, there's always one person who thinks peace is overrated. In my neighborhood, that person is Karen. Karen is the self-appointed queen of our HOA, though technically she's just the president. Early 60s, floral dresses loud enough to scare birds out of the trees, and a personality that feeds on control. She's the type who remembers every line in the HOA handbook, even the parts no one else cares about. I swear if she could, she'd dictate how many ice cubes you're allowed to put in your glass of sweet tea. Karen thrives on conflict. If a mailbox leans too far left, she's got a citation ready. If a lawn grows half an inch too tall, you'll find a fine taped to your door. Some neighbors bend to her rules to avoid trouble. Others roll their eyes and whisper about her at backyard barbecues. But me, I tried to ignore her. For years I thought if I stayed quiet, kept to myself, and followed the rules, she'd have no reason to target me. But that's the thing about people like Karen, they don't need a reason. They just need a victim. I first noticed her watching me a little too closely during one of her infamous neighborhood walks. She had a clipboard in hand, sunglasses perched on her nose, and she paused a little too long in front of my boathouse. At the time, I brushed it off. Everyone knew Karen patrolled like she was guarding Fort Knox. Still, something about the way she narrowed her eyes made the back of my neck prickle. What she saw, of course, was a perfectly legal structure, built on approved land, registered with the county, compliant with every regulation known to man. But Karen didn't see legal. Karen saw something I don't control. And to someone like her, that's unforgivable. At HOA meetings, she started dropping little barbs wrapped in fake concern. Some of us are worried about obstructed views by certain waterfront structures. Or, has anyone double-checked the permits on these older buildings? She never said my name. She didn't have to. Everyone knew who she was talking about. Most of my neighbors stayed neutral. Some were friendly, offering a wink or a shrug when Karen's voice got sharp. Others avoided me, not wanting to be caught in her crosshairs. But Linda and I held our ground. Let her talk, Linda would say, watering her roses like nothing was wrong. You've done everything by the book. And she was right. But I also knew people like Karen don't stop just because the book says so. You might think this is just neighborhood gossip, maybe even funny in a sad way. But here's the truth. When you live in an HOA ruled by someone like Karen, every rule becomes a weapon. And sooner or later, those weapons are aimed at you. Looking back, the signs were all there, the narrowed glances, the snide comments, the whispered conversations. I just didn't realize how far she was willing to go. If I had, maybe I would have been ready when she finally made her move. Because in Karen's world, compromise isn't victory. Only domination counts. And my boathouse, that was her prize target. Let us know where you're watching from today, and if you're new here, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to join our growing community. It started small the way these things always do. With a note, one Tuesday morning I opened my mailbox and found a bright yellow slip folded neatly inside an envelope stamped with the HOA logo. At first I thought it was just another one of their endless newsletters about landscaping tips or community garage sales. But when I unfolded it, my jaw tightened. Notice of violation, it read in bold. The reason Boathouse paint color not in compliance with community aesthetic standards. I actually laughed, out loud. My boathouse had been painted the same shade of weathered gray for nearly a decade, the same shade approved by the county matched to historical waterfront guidelines. I'd kept it up, repainted it twice, even used HOA-approved suppliers. Yet here it was written like some kind of scandal boathouse color not in harmony with adjacent properties. Karen's handwriting was all over it, even if the letter was printed. Linda found me sitting at the kitchen table, the slip between my fingers, shaking my head. Another one, she asked, pouring herself coffee like she'd already seen this coming. Apparently gray is offensive now, I muttered. She sighed. Ignore it. You've got all the paperwork. It's nonsense. And so I did. I filed the slip in a drawer and went about my day. But with Karen, ignoring never makes the problem go away. It only fuels her fire. The following week, I attended the monthly HOA board meeting in the community center. It was the usual scene, a dozen neighbors gathered in folding chairs, stale cookies on the back table, and Karen at the front, like a queen addressing her subjects. She had that clipboard clutched to her chest as though it were a shield. Halfway through the meeting, sandwiched between discussions about lawn ornament restrictions and the upcoming summer picnic, Karen cleared her throat. Now there is the matter of certain non-compliant waterfront structures that have been brought to my attention. Her voice oozed authority, her tone dripping with staged concern. Every head turned toward me. I stayed calm, hands folded, but inside my patience thinned. If you're referring to my boathouse, I said evenly, it's fully permitted. County approved, inspected, and compliant with all HOA guidelines. Karen's smile didn't falter. Well, Jack, we do appreciate your interpretation of the rules. However, several residents have expressed that it blocks the community view of the harbor. We must all be considerate of each other. Interpretation, I repeated. There's no interpretation. I have the permits right here. I held up the folder I'd brought because after years in this community, I knew better than to walk into a meeting unprepared. Karen waved her hand dismissive like I was a child interrupting. Permits or not, the board will be reviewing whether this structure serves the best interest of the neighborhood. If it does not, we will take appropriate measures. The room buzzed with whispers. Some neighbors shifted uncomfortably, others stared at the floor. Karen had spoken, and no one dared oppose her, not openly. I leaned back, kept my voice calm. Karen, I'm happy to share the documents with the board. But if you think you can override county law because you don't like the view you're in for a surprise? Her smile cracked for just a moment before she plastered it back on, duly noted. That was the beginning. Over the next month, the harassment escalated. Another slip in my mailbox, unapproved lighting fixture. I walked down to the dock and there it was, my motion sensor light, the same one I'd had for 10 years, suddenly deemed non-compliant. Then came the emails. Karen forwarded me scanned copies of HOA fines, each one more absurd than the last. Excessive water usage, unkempt shrubbery, unregistered structure accessories. Accessories. She was fining me for a fishing net I'd hung on the wall. Neighbors began whispering more openly. At block parties, I overheard snippets. Karen's really after him. She says the boathouse is unsafe. Maybe he'll have to take it down. One morning I caught Karen snapping photos of the boathouse from across the water. She didn't even try to hide it, just stood there angling her phone like a crime scene investigator. When I raised my hand in a mock wave, she lowered her sunglasses and turned on her heel. Linda urged me to stay calm. Don't give her what she wants, she said, hand on my shoulder. Bullies thrive on reactions. I nodded, but my patience was thinning to a thread. I had permits, I had federal clearance, I had the law on my side. Yet here was Karen acting like a tyrant with unlimited power. Then came the moment I should have seen as a warning sign. At the next HOA meeting, Karen pushed her chair back and announced, "If the board fails to act, I will personally ensure this violation is handled. We cannot allow one resident to undermine the integrity of our community." The words hung in the air, bold, defiant, and while a few neighbors shifted uneasily, no one challenged her. I brushed it off, told myself it was just bluster. Karen loved to hear herself talk, and she thrived on drama. I figured she'd file some more slips, waste some ink on violation letters, and eventually move on to tormenting someone else's mailbox. But I underestimated her, because Karen wasn't bluffing, and while I sat there smug in my confidence that the law protected me, she was already plotting something far worse than fines and violation slips. Something that would turn my quiet harbor life upside down. I should have listened to that sinking feeling in my gut when she made that threat, because soon I'd wake up to the sound of chainsaws. The first time I heard the chainsaws, I thought maybe someone was trimming trees. It was early, the kind of quiet morning where the water was smooth as glass, and you could hear a dog bark half a mile away. But this sound was closer, grinding, buzzing, relentless. When I stepped outside, my heart pounded. The noise was coming from the harbor. Karen wasn't bluffing. A crew of men in neon vests stood around my boathouse, chainsaws and crowbars in hand, hacking away like it was some condemned shack. Wood-splintered nails screeched out of place, and one wall of my boathouse sagged under the assault. I ran down the dock shouting, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" One of the workers glanced at me, shrugged, and pointed toward the parking lot. There she was, Karen, in her wide-brimmed floral hat, arms-crossed sunglasses, glinting in the morning sun like she was overseeing a royal execution. "This structure is in violation of HOA rules," she called out, her voice sharp, carrying across the water. "The board has authorized its removal." The board, I shot back. "Or just you," she smirked. "Don't make this harder than it has to be, Jack. We're within our rights." Within their rights. Those words lit a fire in my chest. These weren't rights, they were crimes. But the damage was already being done. Planks floated off into the harbor. One of the men knocked loose my boat ladder, sending it crashing into the water with a splash. I clenched my fists, but I forced myself not to lose control. Losing my temper wouldn't stop them. It would only give Karen what she wanted, a spectacle. "Pack it up," I barked at the crew. "You're trespassing. This property is federally registered. You're going to regret every nail you pull." They hesitated, exchanging nervous glances. Clearly, Karen hadn't mentioned anything about federal jurisdiction. She marched closer, barking orders like a drill sergeant. "Ignore him. Keep going," but cracks were already showing. One worker muttered, "Lady, we don't have the permits for this." Another shook his head, lowering his crowbar. Karen snapped her fingers like they were school children. I said, "Keep going." In the end, the damage was done. They left my boathouse in pieces, debris scattered like a battlefield. Karen, triumphant, strutted back toward her SUV, her floral dress fluttering like a victory flag. That day marked a turning point. From then on, the harassment didn't just come in paper slips or smug smiles. It was constant, suffocating. First came the fines, stacking higher, more absurd by the week. $250 for harbor obstruction. $500 for unkempt shoreline debris. The irony wasn't lost on me. She destroyed my boathouse and then fined me for the wreckage. Then the inspections. Karen showed up with her clipboard every other day, poking around my dock, snapping photos of my boat, peering through binoculars like a spy. I caught her once crouching behind the hedge near my porch. When I stepped out and said enjoying the view, she straightened up, muttered something about routine compliance checks, and scurried away. Linda begged me to stay calm. "Don't let her drag you down, Jack," she said one evening as we sat on the porch sipping iced tea. "She wants to provoke you." But it was getting harder to ignore. She started whispering to neighbors, spreading poison like it was fertilizer. At the grocery store, I overheard her telling someone I was abusing my federal position to intimidate the community. At the next HOA meeting, she announced, "We cannot allow one resident to think he's above the rules. We're all equal here." Equal, except she wielded fines like a queen's scepter. Worse yet, she tried to bring in outside authorities. I got a surprise visit from a county inspector who sheepishly admitted Karen had filed a complaint, claiming my dock was structurally unsound. The poor guy looked embarrassed when I showed him my spotless inspection reports. "Honestly, Mr. Thompson," he said, "this isn't the first time she's cried wolf." But I still had to come. The real blow came when a letter arrived threatening foreclosure if I didn't pay the mounting HOA fines. Linda opened it, her face pale. "They can't do this, can they?" she asked. "Not legally," I said, though, my stomach twisted. But legality doesn't stop Karen. Pressure does. The pressure was real. Friends I'd known for years avoided me. Some whispered apologies in private, saying they couldn't afford to be on Karen's bad side. Others believed her stories outright, convinced I was the villain undermining community harmony. The isolation cut deeper than I cared to admit. It wasn't just about a boathouse anymore. It was about reputation, dignity, the right to live in peace. And Karen had declared war on all of it. Still, I stayed quiet, outwardly. I let her think she was winning, let her pile on her harassment, her rumors, her phony fines. But inside I was planning, watching, waiting, because Karen had overplayed her hand. She thought she was tearing down some shed built by a stubborn neighbor. What she'd actually done was demolish a federally registered harbor structure without permits, without votes, without a shred of legal authority. Every chainsaw stroke had dug her hole deeper, and I was already collecting the shovels. But Karen, drunk on her own power, wasn't slowing down. If anything, she was doubling down. She had no idea that by escalating her little crusade, she wasn't just poking the bear. She was poking a federal inspector who knew exactly how to bring her empire crashing down, and soon she'd find herself standing in the rubble of her own making. I'll never forget the sight, the bones of my boathouse lying broken along the shoreline, planks bobbing like gravestones in the water. For a moment, I just stood there, hands on my hips, heart pounding, the anger so sharp it tasted metallic on my tongue. Karen, of course, was waiting for me. She strutted down the dock like she'd just won a beauty pageant, sunglasses perched high, that self-satisfied grin plastered on her face. "Well," she said, gesturing toward the wreckage, "problem solved. That eyesore is gone. You can thank me later." I stared at her. "You demolished private property. Without approval. Without permits." Her smirk widened. "Private property, please." It was an unapproved structure, and as HOA president, I had the authority to remove it. She said it like she'd memorized the line in front of a mirror, rehearsed it until she believed it. I let the silence hang for a second. Then I asked, "Did the board vote?" That tiny flicker in her eyes told me everything. She hadn't put it to a vote. She hadn't even told the board. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: relief. Relief because Karen had finally crossed a line so bold, so careless, she couldn't wriggle her way out of it. She'd given me the crack I needed, the slip-up. I didn't argue further. Instead, I walked back to my house, calm, methodical. Linda looked at me with worry when I stepped inside, soaked in sweat and seawater. "Jack, are you okay?" "I'm better than okay," I told her, grabbing my camera. She just handed me the rope to hang her with. From that moment on, I switched from defense to offense. I started documenting everything. I took photos of the debris scattered across the shoreline, close-ups of the broken dock posts, time-stamped shots of the damage. I filmed myself walking through the wreckage, narrating what had happened, pointing out the lack of warning signs or permits. I even interviewed the demolition crew, most of them eager to talk once Karen wasn't hovering over their shoulders. One of them confessed, "We didn't have paperwork. She just said the HOA approved it. Perfect." Next, I dug through the HOA records. I had copies of every meeting agenda, every board decision. Nowhere, not once, was there any mention of my boathouse being scheduled for demolition. That meant Karen had acted unilaterally, abusing her power. I made copies, highlighted the gaps, tucked them neatly into a binder, and then the cherry on top, the threatening letters. I'd saved them all. Every violation slip, every email dripping with Karen's smug wording. Together, they painted a perfect picture of harassment, intimidation, and abuse of authority. Linda helped me organize everything into neat stacks on our dining table. "Feels like building a case," she said, handing me another folder. "That's exactly what it is," I told her. But the best part wasn't in the HOA documents. It was in the federal registry. Because Karen didn't care to know that my boathouse wasn't just some backyard shed. It was listed as a federally registered harbor structure. That meant demolishing it wasn't a neighborhood issue. It was a federal crime. Karen had thought she was flexing her HOA muscles. In reality, she just kicked a hornet's nest with a federal seal on it. I still played it cool in public. I let her strut around like a peacock, telling neighbors she'd handled the problem. She even bragged at the next HOA meeting, standing tall in her floral dress. "The harbor is cleaner now," she announced, "and we can all enjoy the view again without obstruction." I didn't argue. I sat in the back row, calm, jotting notes. Some neighbors clapped politely, others just avoided looking at me. Karen basked in the attention, convinced she'd humiliated me into silence. But inside, I was grinning. Because while she paraded around, I had already contacted my lawyer. I'd already sent documentation to my office. And I had already spoken to a federal colleague who all but laughed when he heard what had happened. She demolished a registered structure, he asked over the phone. Without permits. That's not just an HOA problem, Jack. That's destruction of federal property. Exactly. I spent the next week gathering more evidence, stacking the deck so high even Karen's bravado couldn't climb it. Every photo, every letter, every statement from the workers went into my file. Linda kept urging me to be patient. Don't rush it, she said. Let her dig deeper. And she did. Karen, drunk on her own victory, started bragging louder. She told anyone who'd listen that she'd cleaned up the harbor single-handedly. She even tried to fine me for the debris she had caused, claiming it was my responsibility to remove the wreckage. The audacity would have been laughable if it weren't so useful. Every fine she sent me went straight into my evidence binder. Neighbors began to notice the cracks too. A few whispered to me, quietly apologizing for staying silent. One even admitted, "She told us the board voted, but I never saw anything in the minutes." Exactly the confirmation I needed. By the time my binder was full, I no longer felt like the victim. I felt like the hunter. Karen thought she was circling me, tightening the noose. But really she'd stepped into her own trap and the teeth were about to snap shut. For the first time in weeks I slept peacefully, because the tide was about to turn. And when it did, Karen wouldn't be standing on the dock smiling in victory. She'd be standing in front of a room full of witnesses facing the truth she thought she could bury with a chainsaw. If Karen had stopped there, maybe she could have salvaged something, her reputation, her presidency, even her dignity. But Karen wasn't wired for retreat. When she sensed resistance, she didn't slow down. She doubled down. The first sign came the morning after I filed my formal complaint. I found a flyer stuffed into every mailbox on the street. Across the top, bold letters screamed, "Community Alert, Abuse of Power" by Harbor Inspector. I stood at the curb with the paper in my hands, my blood simmering. The flyer accused me of using federal intimidation tactics to silence the HOA. It claimed I'd built my boathouse, illegally bullied neighbors with technical jargon, and was now weaponizing his government position for personal gain. It was laughable, pure fiction. But Karen's genius wasn't in facts. It was in drama. She knew how to twist a story until the uninformed couldn't tell which way was up. Linda came out of the house, her hands on her hips. "She printed lies about you, printed and delivered," I said, waving the paper. "Karen's running her own tabloid now." Linda frowned. "Some people will believe this, Jack." And she was right. Within days, I noticed fewer friendly waves, more averted eyes. At the market, a neighbor muttered under his breath, "Power goes to some people's heads." I wanted to snap back, but I bit my tongue. That was just the beginning. The next week, I received a thick envelope from the HOA, stuffed with fines. $750 for improper shoreline maintenance, $400 for unsightly debris obstructing harbor access, and my personal favorite $1, $200 for failure to comply with HOA demolition directive. I laughed bitterly. She destroys my boathouse, then fines me for not demolishing it myself. But laughter didn't pay bills. And stacked fines were exactly how HOAs pressured people into foreclosure. Linda could see the stress etching lines into my face. "We'll fight it," she said, squeezing my hand. "Just hold steady." Karen wasn't finished. She knew legal threats might not scare me, so she turned to the one weapon she'd always used: best gossip. One afternoon, as I walked past the community park, I overheard her talking to a cluster of neighbors. She didn't see me behind the hedge, but her voice carried. "He acts like he's the law around here," she sneered. "Inspects his own boathouse, ignores our rules, then cries victim when we enforce them. I'm telling you, he's dangerous. Dangerous. Me, the guy who spent weekends fixing his boat and drinking iced tea with his wife. But when Karen threw mud, some of it stuck. A neighbor I'd known for years stopped returning my calls. Another posted a passive-aggressive comment on the community Facebook page. Some people think federal titles make them untouchable. Sad. It stung. More than I wanted to admit. Karen then took her performance to the next level. She called a local news station. 2 days later, a van rolled up with a camera crew. The reporter, all smiles, approached me at the end of my driveway. "Mr. Thompson, we're doing a story on HOA conflicts. We understand you've been accused of abusing your federal position to intimidate your neighbors. Would you like to comment?" My jaw tightened. Behind them, Karen hovered in the background, pretending not to watch her sunglasses, hiding what I knew was a gleeful grin. I kept my composure. "Yes, I'd like to comment," I said, staring into the camera. "Everything she's told you is a lie. I've complied with every law, every regulation. What she doesn't want to admit is that she acted illegally when she demolished a federally registered structure." The reporter blinked, caught off guard. "Federally registered," I nodded. "That's right. She didn't just break HOA bylaws. She violated federal law. The cameraman lowered his rig slightly. They hadn't expected that angle. Karen stormed forward, waving her hands. That's nonsense. He's twisting words, trying to scare you. This is a community issue, nothing more. I turned to her, my voice steady. Then you won't mind if federal investigators get involved. Her face tightened. For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt. But Karen wasn't done swinging. That night, another envelope slid under my door, a cease and desist letter accusing me of slander against the HOA. It threatened legal action if I continued defaming board leadership. Linda read it aloud, then tossed it onto the counter. She's desperate, she said. Desperate, yes, but still dangerous. The pressure mounted. My phone buzzed with anonymous calls at night. HOA inspectors showed up unannounced, poking around my property. I even found my trash can overturned one morning, garbage strewn across the yard. Petty, childish, but effective in wearing me down. Karen wanted me rattled. She wanted me to lose control, to lash out, so she could paint me as the villain. But here's the thing. When you've spent decades in the Navy, when you've inspected harbors in storms that could swallow ships whole, you don't break easily. I'd faced worse than Karen's theatrics, so I smiled through it. I let her think her counterattack was working. I let her believe her flyers, her fines, her gossip were breaking me down. Meanwhile, I was meeting quietly with my lawyer, sending evidence to my federal office, stacking documents, photos, and testimonies so high that not even her lies could topple them. Karen thought she was tightening the screws, but really she was building pressure inside a boiler. And soon it was going to explode. The neighborhood thought this was just a petty feud, but Karen was about to learn the hard way. This wasn't HOA versus homeowner anymore. This was HOA versus federal law. And in that battle, the outcome was already written. By the time Karen had plastered the neighborhood with flyers and summoned reporters to my driveway, I knew we'd crossed the line of no return. This wasn't just about a boathouse anymore. This was about power, and Karen wasn't about to give hers up without a fight. But here's the thing, power without legitimacy is like a boat without an anchor. It looks impressive drifting along, but the tide is already pulling it out to sea, and I was about to show Karen just how far out she'd drifted. I started by tightening the legal net. My lawyer, a maritime specialist named Andrew Clark, was calm, sharp, and hungry. When I handed him the thick binder I'd assembled, his eyes lit up. "You've done half my job already," he said, flipping through photos, letters, and witness statements. She ordered demolition without a board vote, without permits, and on a federally registered structure. That's not just an HOA dispute. That's criminal mischief and destruction of federal property. Hearing it out loud was like breathing clean air after weeks of choking smoke. "Good," I said. "Then, let's make sure she knows it." But we didn't move fast. Andrew advised patience. Let her keep acting like she's in control. Every word she says, every action she takes just adds to your case. When we move decisively. So I waited, quietly, methodically. Meanwhile, I shored up my support in the neighborhood. A few brave souls who'd grown tired of Karen's reign started approaching me quietly. One neighbor, Tom, the guy with the golden retriever, pulled me aside at the mailbox. "I don't want to get on her bad side," he whispered, "but I'll testify she told us the board voted when they didn't. I've got the emails. Perfect." Another neighbor admitted she'd been pressured into signing a complaint letter against me. She said if I didn't, she'd fine me for my porch swing, the woman confessed, tears in her eyes. I reassured her, "Don't worry. The truth will come out." Every story, every testimony added another nail in Karen's coffin. At home, Linda became my strategist, and cheerleader rolled into one. She labeled folders, highlighted key documents, and even created a timeline of Karen's harassment. At night, we sat at the dining table, papers spread everywhere like generals plotting a campaign. "You know what this is, Jack," she said one evening, pen tapping the table. "It's not a fight about rules. It's about bullies. And bullies only win if you let them scare you." She was right, and I was done being scared. The final piece was my ace, the one thing Karen didn't even know existed. My federal badge. I'd kept it tucked away, never flaunting it. My role as a harbor inspector wasn't something I bragged about. But the day Karen's demolition crew tore down my boathouse, she hadn't just offended me personally, she'd violated federal jurisdiction. That gave me more than just leverage. It gave me authority. With Andrew's help, I filed a federal claim, quietly, formally by the book. At the same time, I prepared for the public showdown, the next HOA meeting. This wasn't just about lawyers and paperwork anymore. It was about making sure the entire neighborhood saw Karen for who she really was. In the days leading up to the meeting, Karen strutted around like a rooster, telling everyone she'd handled the harbor problem once and for all. She laughed loudly at block parties, bragged about standing up to tyranny, and sent yet another round of fines to my mailbox. I didn't respond. I let her have her stage, because once the curtain dropped, she'd be exposed. Meanwhile, I fortified my side. I gathered affidavits from neighbors. I collected the demolition crew's statements. I prepared copies of my federal registration documents. I even printed enlarged photographs of the wreckage ready to plaster them across the community center if needed. Linda kept me grounded. Don't gloat, she warned. Stick to the facts. Let her bury herself. The night before the meeting, I sat alone on the porch, listening to the water lap against the dock. For weeks, the harbor had felt like a battlefield, the wreckage of my boathouse, a constant reminder of Karen's cruelty. But now, staring out at the moonlit water, I felt something shift. Confidence. I thought of all the homeowners Karen had bullied over the years, the man she fined for Christmas lights, the couple she shamed for planting the wrong kind of flowers, the retiree she threatened with foreclosure over a cracked driveway. They'd all suffered in silence. But tomorrow, silence would end. Tomorrow, the queen of the HOA would face her reckoning. When the sun rose, I dressed deliberately neat button-down shirt slacks, no uniform, no badge on display. I wanted them to see me first as a neighbor, a homeowner, a man who had been wronged. But tucked in my pocket under the folder of evidence was the badge that would end Karen's game once and for all. By evening, the community center was buzzing. Folding chairs scraped across the floor, neighbors clustered in anxious groups. Some looked nervous, others excited like they sensed something big was about to happen. Karen entered last, sweeping in like royalty floral dress, bright as ever. She clutched her clipboard like it was a scepter, chin-raised lips curled in a smug smile. She thought this would be another performance, another chance to humiliate me. She had no idea the stage had already been set for her downfall. The community center buzzed like a hive. Neighbors filled the folding chairs, murmurs rising as the air thickened with anticipation. You could feel it. This wasn't going to be just another HOA meeting about lawn ornaments or recycling schedules. Everyone knew Karen had something planned, and so did I. Karen strutted to the front like she owned the place, floral dress-swishing clipboard tucked beneath her arm. She tapped the microphone with unnecessary drama, letting the squeal of feedback hush the crowd. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her tone dripping with authority. "Tonight we will be addressing ongoing violations that threaten the integrity of our community." Her eyes scanned the room and landed on me. A satisfied grin tugged at her lips. Specifically, she continued one resident's blatant disregard for our bylaws, resulting in unsightly destruction along our waterfront. This resident has repeatedly defied the board endangered property values and even attempted to intimidate this association using his so-called federal position. Gasps rippled through the room. Some neighbors glanced at me, others shifted uncomfortably. Karen thrived on that discomfort. I rose slowly, evidence binder in hand, and made my way to the front. The room quieted as I set my folder on the table beside her clipboard. I didn't touch the mic. I didn't need theatrics. My voice carried just fine. "Karen," I said evenly, "you've spoken a lot about rules tonight, about community, about integrity, but what you've really done is abuse your position to target, harass, and destroy." She laughed, sharp and dismissive. "Harassment, destroy, please. The board authorized the removal of your illegal boathouse. You're simply upset you couldn't bully us with your government job." I opened the binder, flipping it toward the crowd. Inside were photos, clear time-stamped shots of my boathouse before the demolition, perfectly intact, fully permitted. Then photos of the wreckage. Gasps spread again. "This," I said, pointing to the images, "is not a violation. This is a crime. And it wasn't authorized by the board." Karen leaned into the mic. "Of course it was." The board agreed. I pulled out a printed copy of the official HOA meeting minutes. Highlighted lines showed no mention of demolition. I held it up. "Here are the records. No vote was taken. No motion recorded. You acted alone." The room erupted in whispers. Karen's smile faltered. But I wasn't done. I pulled out statements from the demolition crew. "These are testimonies from the very workers you hired. They confirm no permits were filed, no county approval obtained. You told them the HOA authorized it when in fact you didn't have that authority." A neighbor in the front row shook his head. Another whispered, "She lied." Karen's face reddened. "Lies. Those men don't know what they're talking about." I ignored her outburst and laid down the final piece, my federal registration papers. The seal gleamed under the fluorescent lights. "And this," I said, tapping the document, "is proof that my boathouse was federally registered. Which means when you ordered its demolition, you didn't just break HOA bylaws, you violated federal law." Karen's jaw dropped. For the first time, she didn't have a rehearsed line. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my badge. The room fell silent as the gold glint caught the light. "I am a federal harbor inspector. That structure was under my jurisdiction. You didn't just cross a line, Karen, you bulldozed right over it. The silence broke into chaos. Neighbors gasped, some shouted, others sat stunned. Karen stammered into the mic Thursday, "This is outrageous. He's lying. He's making it up." But the damage was done. Faces that once looked at her with fear now stared with anger. One man stood. "You told us the board voted Karen." Another woman added, "You said his boathouse was illegal." I calmly set down the final document, a copy of the federal claim I'd filed, stamped, and signed. "Karen, federal investigators are already aware of what you did. This meeting isn't your stage anymore. It's your evidence hearing." Her hands trembled on the mic. You can't do this. I'm the president. I decide what's best for this community." "No," I said, voice steady. "You decided what was best for yourself, and now you'll answer for it." The board members, silent until now, finally spoke. One cleared his throat. Effective immediately, I motioned to suspend Karen's presidency pending investigation. Another quickly seconded. The vote passed almost unanimously. Only Karen herself raised her hand in opposition. The room erupted, not in support for her, but in relief. Neighbors who had been silent for years finally spoke up. Stories poured out of past harassment fines for flower beds, threats over mailbox heights, humiliation at meetings. Karen had ruled through fear, but the dam had broken. Karen, pale and shaking, tried to shout them down, but her voice cracked. She stormed from the room, floral dress whipping behind her, shoving past chairs. For the first time, she wasn't walking out triumphant. She was fleeing. I gathered my papers, slipped the badge back into my pocket, and took a deep breath. The battle wasn't completely over. There would still be legal proceedings, restitution cleanup. But in that moment, in front of my neighbors, the tide had turned. For once, the HOA queen was dethroned, and she had no idea how much further she still had to fall. The week after Karen's downfall, the neighborhood felt different, lighter almost. For years, people had walked around with invisible weights on their shoulders, always afraid of what new rule Karen would enforce, what new fine would appear in their mailbox. Now those same people greeted me at the harbor with hesitant smiles, like survivors blinking in the sunlight after a storm. My boathouse lay in ruins still, but there was something symbolic about it, a reminder of the cost of unchecked power, yes, but also of resilience. Because soon after the federal claim advanced, I received confirmation not only would I be allowed to rebuild, but federal funds would cover much of the reconstruction. The harbor, after all, was under government jurisdiction, and Karen's reckless actions had crossed into federal territory. When I told Linda, she hugged me so tightly I almost lost my breath. "You see," she said, "justice has a way of catching up." The neighbors slowly began to show their true colors. Tom, the man with the golden retriever, stopped by with a six-pack of beer. "I should have spoken up sooner," he admitted, eyes downcast. "I let her push me around. But seeing you stand up to her, it gave me courage." Another couple knocked on our door, tears in their eyes. "She threatened us with foreclosure last year over our shutters," the wife confessed. "We didn't fight because we thought we couldn't win. Thank you for proving her wrong." It struck me then, this wasn't just about me reclaiming my dignity. It was about the entire community reclaiming theirs. Karen, meanwhile, was a shadow of her former self. She'd been stripped of her presidency, fined heavily for misusing HOA funds to pay for the demolition crew, and faced looming legal consequences from the federal claim. Once the queen bee, she now avoided public spaces, her floral dresses traded for muted sweaters, as if even her wardrobe had surrendered. I'd see her occasionally scurrying from her car to her front door, eyes darting, shoulders hunched. No more swagger, no more clipboard. Just a woman who'd built her empire on fear and watched it crumble in a single night. As for me, I focused on rebuilding. The new boathouse rose slowly but surely, beams fitted, strong siding painted the same proud gray Karen once despised. Neighbors came to watch, some even lending a hand. Kids brought lemonade, dogs ran along the shoreline, laughter filled the air again. For the first time in years, the harbor felt like a community instead of a kingdom. When the final plank was nailed in place, I stood on the dock with Linda at my side, the water shimmering beneath us. The boathouse wasn't just wood and nails anymore. It was a symbol of resilience, a reminder that bullies don't get the final word. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky orange, I sat on the porch and reflected. The whole ordeal had cost me sleepless nights, stress, and frustration. But it also gave me perspective. I realized how fragile peace can be when power falls into the wrong hands, and how important it is to stand your ground not just for yourself, but for everyone who can't. Karen had wanted to tear me down, to show the neighborhood that no one could defy her. Instead, she revealed her own weakness, arrogance. In the end, it wasn't my badge that destroyed her, it was her own hubris. As the seasons changed and life returned to normal, neighbors still stopped me to share stories. "Remember when she fined me for having too many bird feeders?" one man laughed. "Feels like another lifetime now." And it did. The HOA still existed, of course, but now it operated with checks and balances. The board held real votes, transparency was enforced, and no one person could ever wield the kind of unchecked authority Karen had abused. And me, I went back to fishing at dawn, sipping coffee on the dock, and enjoying the quiet life I'd wanted all along. The difference was now, the quiet wasn't threatened by whispers of fines or the echo of chainsaws. It was real, earned, and lasting. Karen faded into the background, a cautionary tale whispered among neighbors. But for me, she would always be the reminder that standing up, calmly, firmly, and with the truth on your side can change everything. Because sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't anger or even authority. It's patience. Patience to let someone dig their own grave and courage to reveal it when the time is right. And when you do, well, justice has a way of echoing louder than chainsaws ever could. If there's one thing I've learned from this ordeal, it's this: bullies only win when good people stay silent. Karen wasn't powerful because she was right. She was powerful because too many of us were afraid to challenge her. But the moment someone stood up, her empire of fear collapsed. Life has a way of testing our patience, of throwing us into battles we never asked for. But if you stay calm, gather the truth, and hold your ground, even the strongest bully can be brought down. And when that happens, it doesn't just free you, it frees everyone they've ever intimidated. So if you're watching this, I want you to ask yourself, where in your life do you need to stand up? Who is your Karen? And what would happen if you stopped being silent? Share your story in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to like the video and subscribe, because trust me, there are plenty more HOA stories to tell.